Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 232 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which, this episode is all going to be about transitioning to remote. So in the episode, I talked to Jackie Walpole from Peppercom, where they have introduced new ways of working that allow employees to work from wherever. And then I talked to Rai Austin from Core, where they help organizations adopt technology that will help them achieve their aims, because that is always the point of introducing technology. And more specifically at Core, they help to adopt Microsoft products. But we did keep our conversation pretty general around, why people adopt technology, some of the things that are involved in deciding what tools to make available to employees, how to make them available, etc. So this episode, I am recording this introduction on the 20th of April, 2020. The episode will not go out for another 2 weeks almost. This episode's been planned for a while and does not look at the current suddenly having to work from home and set up systems to work together remotely really quickly. But I hope it will still address the current situation through some points. And although my hope, to be honest, is that it helps those of you who had already planned to make the transition or who are planning to make the transition more deliberately after the worst is over. And for those of you well on the way and who, have already thought about all this, I hope we will entertain you for a while as we share how other people are working in a location-independent fashion. And an office-optional way, dare I say, as we say in Virtual Not Distant, although at the moment the office is not much of an option for many, so never mind. I've got another tangential thought, talking about office optional, and this is a thought, what will the office look like in the future? Especially as social distancing will need to be maintained in some shape or form over, the next year, more, forever, I don't know. And once remote work has been experienced by many firsthand, the office might also need to change, as that becomes an option to keeping expensive offices too. So I will leave that one hanging. What will the office of the future look like? And I'm already starting to see articles, etc. But I would love to invite, I'm inviting your contributions, listeners. I would love to hear your answers. You can send me a message via email, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com, or there's a contact form there at virtualnotdistant.com as well. So by the way, if we haven't met before, it's great to have you here. I'm Pilar Orti, Director of Virtual Not Distant. And regular listeners, so glad to have you back. Really, really glad. Right. Before I get emotional, let's go on to today's episode, which I recorded with Jackie Walpole back on the 9th of March. And we already released a short conversation with her as a bonus episode on suddenly working from home when all of this was exploding. But the conversation today, it's about a broader approach to remote work, which at her company they call work wherever. And I think it's important to remind everyone here about the wherever part, that working remotely doesn't mean working from home. All it means is that you're working apart from your team members. And work wherever sounds much warmer and appealing also than remote work. I mean, the words virtual, I know it's in our company name, remote, even distributed, they remind us of the distance. Whereas work wherever is about, you can do it. You can do it. So that's maybe the first insight of the conversation. That if you're transitioning to an office optional approach, again, we call it office optional. It's not a very sexy name, but it says what it is. But if you're introducing something like remote work, or if you're finding yourself being forced to work away from each other, pick a name for it. Pick something nice. And the other thing I'd like to point out about the conversation that you're about to hear is that companies introduce remote work for all sorts of reasons. This is when we have the choice. And sometimes remote work is introduced because it supports some other change in the organization or because something else is going on. The other day at a session I was running, someone asked what were the main drivers for introducing remote work, and things that came to mind were reducing office costs, of course, responding to a request for flexible setups by employees. That's where remote work is the aim, but also supporting changes in an organization. I'm seeing this, which is great, which is where we can introduce remote work to support what we want to do. Don't let location independence be a problem. Don't let non-shared locations be a problem. And it can allow teams to reorganize and organize themselves in a way that supports the work best, not driven by location. So more on all of that from Jackie. So I will leave you now with that first conversation. Then we'll go straight to the talk with Rai about introducing tech. And I'll be back right at the end to pick up on something that Rai mentions, that he's had to change himself about how he works with his team. Because although they were already a cloud-based company, well, they were still spending time together in the office as a team. And then with COVID, that has changed. So this is another interesting reflection that technology is being adopted a lot by people who still work in the office together. And then being away from each other just requires that little bit like a 20% adjustment. So they were almost ready. And then also he mentions one of those things that most organizations and teams are concerned about when they make the transition to remote in any kind of context. So I thought I'd expand on that right at the end. So I'll see you at the other side. I hope you enjoy these two conversations. Well, I'm delighted to have on the other side of Zoom, because Skype wouldn't work. we actually have a listener who actually is also on the newsletter list, and she got in touch when I put out a call through the newsletter to try something out, and she explained her context, and I thought, well, that is very interesting. I don't want to keep this to myself. I want to share it, and I want to know more. So I'm delighted to introduce Jackie Walpole, who's the Senior Vice President of Peppercom. Hello, Jackie.
Hello, Pilar.
I think we're going to be talking about mainly your transition as a company to what you call, I can't believe I don't have that in my show notes.
Work wherever.
Work wherever. That's the one, work wherever, yes. So as always, context is very important. So it'd be great if you could start telling us a little bit about your organization and the employee setup. And then what happened in 2018 for you to change the way in which you work?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. As way of background, so Peppercom is a communications agency based out of New York. It's been around for about 25 years now. And they also have offices in London and in San Francisco. And, a lot of the work that was being done over the past few years really focused on professional services, financial services, and supporting consumer brands as well. But yeah, so one of the things about Peppercom is a few years ago, back in 2018, there was a little bit of a split between the two co-founders. They found that there was one section of the company was really focused a bit more on some of the technology trends and digital evolution that was taking place. And then there was another side of the firm that was really doubling down and focused on some more of the communications that was a bit more traditional, focused on PR, focused on writing, content development. And the founders decided it was a kind of a natural time to split the company. And with that, they became Peppercom on one side, just kind of continued on with that branding. And then on the other side, it became Hot Paper Lantern. And with that time, it ended up being that this communications agency that was pretty well known, at least in New York and in that setting, had an opportunity to think of itself a little bit differently. It was seeing itself in this fresh way as a 25-year-old startup, essentially. When the split happened, the workforce split in half too. So we went from a company that was closer to about 100 people to 50 when you continued on with Peppercom. And so there was a chance to kind of step back and say what works, what doesn't, where is this industry really going in the future, what do our clients need, but then also what does our talent need in order to be successful. I was in a unique kind of point in life myself too, because I had actually come back from maternity leave. I have twin sons at the exact time that the split was actually taking place. And I was thinking about, hey, where do I want to raise my family? How do I want to continue to balance life and career? And my husband actually had an opportunity in Florida at that time that we thought would be interesting to pursue. I wanted to obviously continue on with my career in communications, but it was a chance for us to say, okay, well, let's try this. Let's go down to Florida. Let's see if I can continue to do what I'm doing and continue to grow in my career from a remote location. And because we were in this sort of change mindset anyway, and thinking through how can we do things differently and do things in a more modern sort of a way, it was a really natural time for me to go remote. So that worked out. And we had one other employee at that point who was an SVP then and has since then become a partner at the firm, who was already working remotely from Philadelphia. But he was really a bit more present in the office still. He was going up probably 2 or 3 times a week. So this was the first real experiment of having somebody fully remote for the firm, having me go down. So it was an interesting time. And, I think when we first kicked off, there were a lot of growing pains and kind of figuring out what tools and resources we need in order to make that really work. We were relying really heavily on email still and phone calls and just regular conference lines and things like that. But as we started to realize that's not the way things work. I think actually they even sent me down with a desktop computer. Like, oh, okay, well, we have to think through what's really going to work in this new way of working. So, I worked with the team and put together some proposals on here's what we really need to do. We need a different type of project management system where we can do things in an asynchronous sort of a way. We can start to think through how to reach each other in different ways, but stay present when I'm not going to physically be able to get to the office that 2 to 3 times a week. That was kind of the standard beforehand. So there was a lot of learning that needed to be done. And since then, we've now have 5 people who are fully remote in different parts of the country. And it's working really well. We're using things like Microsoft Teams. We're doing video calls more frequently. We are making sure that there's some more standardization around the types of client trackers and project management tools and some of those kind of basics that should always be there. But, sometimes they go to the wayside if you're in the middle of some busy work for clients, but making sure that, you're putting a re-emphasis on the things that are really going to help everybody in the team know exactly what needs to be done and who's responsible for it and what the deadlines are and things like that. So some of the fundamentals came to play when we were making this transition.
That's great. And really interesting, some of the stuff you're saying, because of course, some people who are thinking of transitioning, either organizations or teams, they always want to look out for best practices. But what is really important on hearing you about your context is that we really need to understand where companies are and really get into the detail. So some of the stuff that I find very interesting of what you're saying is, one, there was a change that was happening in the organization anyway. And I find that this quite a lot, that it's often the nature of the work or what's already happening in the organization. When that drives the change, I'm not saying it's easy, but people understand and you're already changing something, so you might as well change something else. It's not like remote or flexible for that, which is also important and necessary. And the other thing that really struck me is that senior management and the more senior people, actually, you were saying, I think a partner also, someone who's now a partner, sorry. You wanted that shift. You were going to experience that firsthand. It was something that actually would make your own lives better, or so you thought then.
Yeah.
But I think that is also something to bear in mind, that it's really important to have that real. It's not just, oh yeah, we can do that. Let's go remote, or let's allow people to work from wherever. Actually, no, it was, yeah, I really want to do this, so I'm going to experience it as part of the transition. I think that's a really important point.
With that kind of step back and that knowing that things are going to change one way or another, it gives you the chance to take the space to really think through, okay, how can we make this better for everybody? And yes, it definitely was a life choice for me when I decided to go remote. But I think it was also an interesting choice for the agency overall, because one of the things about communications agencies is a lot of times they're based in urban settings. They're run by a lot, folks who are actually doing a lot of the day-to-day work are a bit younger. And the perspective reflects that sometimes when you're chatting with clients, or when you're, just thinking through what needs to happen as far as social and PR and things like that. And I think coming out of that and being separate from it and being in a totally different type of location, for me, it was Fort Lauderdale for a little bit, and I've actually since then moved up to Maine in a small town right outside Kennebunk. And the perspectives that I'm around just in my community have influenced the way that I approach my work, influenced the thinking that I can bring back to some of our clients. And it's interesting to think that, why are we so focused on being in one type of location for that, Madison Avenue sort of a name and recognition point, when what really matters is to bring in different perspectives, bring in who we're actually trying to reach at the end of the day, and have that be part of the way that we do our work. So I think it's been a really interesting experience, just not even just, knowing that, but also thinking through, oh, this brings a whole new lens or a whole new offering to the table that we might not have had access to in the past. I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that tap into local communities is something that you can't get from one location with one sort of demographic at your fingertips.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I've often thought that if organizations have their people working in co-working spaces, that definitely does that. It broadens your perspective, and there are other opportunities, etc. But I don't think I'd ever gone as far as thinking, well, actually, yes, of course, if you are in another community, in another location, hanging out even during the day, or just seeing different kinds of people around you, for creative work, especially for the creative industries, that is invaluable. And I think it can also, not that remote companies or remote teams cannot suffer from groupthink, because they can, and they can
Of
suffer
course.
from a very narrow culture. And however, this physical distance from each other can help to just keep us all a little bit more open and receptive to other stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we've definitely seen that.
Good. Well, that's a great point. So let's go a little bit to the transition itself. So I gather it was the senior team that instigated the change. How was this communicated? Was it as part of the bigger change program, or later? How was it, Jackie?
For me, it was actually just because of the timing. It all kind of came together in one sort of announcement that it was, this is happening. Here's where our people are going to be. This is what we're doing. But I think, it didn't take very long for the full group to kind of come together, junior staffers, mid-level, seniors, to actually chat through, okay, what do we want this new 25-year-old startup to really feel like and be like moving forward? So when we had those conversations, it was very clear at the same time that others who were going to be based out of the offices that we already had were also looking for some level of flexibility. And they saw that this was something that was being offered to others on an ad hoc kind of a basis. But they wanted to be able to experience it themselves and to say, there are certain times when it makes sense for me to either be working from home or from being able to travel a bit and then work from wherever I am. And so that was where the company kind of came together in a different way to think really strategically through what can we do on this front to kind of focus on this desire from the work staff that we're hearing, but do it in a way that's responsible and instills accountability and also gives people the autonomy that they're looking for. So I think that was when we came to a point when there was a bit more of a formal process put in place, where we said, okay, this isn't something that is unique to just the remote workers. Others have, things that pop up or things that they need to do in their lives as well that are just as important. So let's think through, how can we become a company that supports work remotely, even if it's a few times a week, a few times a month, whatever makes sense for our other individuals. And that was another kind of point of growth, I think, for the firm. And I think it was one thing that, sometimes it was abused in the beginning, where you'd have people who wouldn't be in the office and the office would be crickets for a couple of weeks. And you had to say, okay, well, we still need to have some people here physically sometimes. So let's figure out when it makes sense for people to be out. If there are meetings, client needs, things like that, where people do need to physically be co-located, what does that look like for calling in the folks who would otherwise be working from home, otherwise be looking to, do change up the way that they're working normally anyway. And so we did have to rely really heavily on this idea of accountability, making sure that you're clear with your teams, you're clear with each other on what needs to get done, and making sure that it is getting done in a way that is sensible and makes sense for everybody, for your client, for you. And then also that, balancing that with just the autonomy that people were looking for. So we're not trying to say that every day, all the time, you need to be in the office. It is really just about being transparent about when you should be there, when you need to be there, and when you might have something that you want to do outside or from a different location.
So what were because that's a very interesting point, that the office was quiet and you thought, well, we have to have people here. Why was that? Is that because of clients? Why did you feel like the office needed to be used?
Part of it is we have this space so that the people can sit down and do brainstorming together. And sometimes face-to-face does matter. I think that especially for building relationships and for teaching when it's an employee who might be a little bit younger in their career, that face-to-face time means a lot to make sure that they know they have somebody to go to. They know they can bounce ideas a little bit more fluidly. One of the things that I heard, just from the folks who are remote right now, and this kind of ties into your visibility piece on teamwork in general, is that there's a feeling that there's a disconnection. And it wasn't that there actually was a disconnect. Anytime they were asked, well, could you get this person on the phone when you wanted them? Could you chat with them? Could you set up meetings? Yes, 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 all of those things. But it really was just actually feeling like there was a chance to catch somebody at the water cooler,
right.
That was missing. And I feel like the culture could have gone away, that would have suffered if that had continued for too much, especially for those junior staffers. As you kind of grow and as you kind of get into your own workflow, it seems to matter less and less, but being there for other employees can need to be a physical thing every once in a while, at least.
And you make me think as well, because of the whole thing about how important it is to be able to have spontaneous interactions, because we can't always plan when we're going to need people. And sometimes these spontaneous interactions, as well as information, give us joy. And the office, in your case, and in every kind of office optional setup, the office is another place where these spontaneous interactions can happen. But if we don't plan when we're going to be in the office, those spontaneous interactions can't happen. So again, it's the setup that we're creating needs to know, okay, sometimes we're going to need people to be co-located. So let's plan around that.
Yeah, and I think some of the best times in the working years when we do have people from wherever they are come into the office and gather together. And I obviously that's a once a year sort of thing when everyone's together, or a couple of times a year when you have your certain team meetings and things like that happen in person.
So all of this stuff, I mean, I'm sure that when you were saying actually when you started, that's something you probably hadn't thought of, is, our office might be really empty and this is going to cause an issue.
Yeah.
And you, in your communication with me, you mentioned that you went through an extensive culture shift.
Yes.
So what did that entail, Jackie?
I think, one of the things that happens anytime there's a big shift in a company like we experienced, it's sometimes not right for everybody. So I think part of it was just the folks who were there. It was determining who was going to be able to adapt to a new way of doing work. And, sometimes there were folks who decided it wasn't for them. And we did have a pretty big shift, especially among the mid levels, where folks were, used to the way that they did work and they were having a little bit of difficulty adopting to some new technologies that we're using, new systems and processes that were required in order to move to this work wherever sort of mentality. So I think that was one thing that happened. We had to find the right mix of individuals who not only were able to kind of transform the way that they work, but also had an appetite for trying things that were a little bit new. It does require a bit of an entrepreneurial kind of a mindset overall. And I think that's not for everybody. So that was part of it. And I think the folks who, came along for the ride overall were definitely the folks who wanted to shape something and make something and make it a better kind of situation for themselves, for their clients. And we're constantly looking for new ways to adapt to these tools and try different things out.
Sometimes what happens when something changes in the organization and when the culture needs to change is that the people also need to change. So that's
Absolutely.
Back to your point that some people just didn't want this. So we move on from them. But I think also the experimentation angle. It's not like, okay, we're now going to be a work wherever company. Switch on a switch. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to try stuff. Stuff is not going to work. It's going to be uncomfortable. But hey, we're going to move on and try something else. And if for whatever reason you're not up for that, then this is not a good time for you to be in a company like this.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there was a lot of tweaking along the way, and there had to be an understanding of everybody who was on board that it was a work in progress. We were gonna have to try things. We were gonna have to change the way that we approach things, and it was going to be a little bit of time spent, focused on just getting it right.
Was there anything that happened or any behaviors that emerged that you weren't expecting or actually any that you were expecting apart from the ones you've mentioned already?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me was just realizing that we really needed to get back to basics and just on our craft in general. I think when people were used to a certain way of functioning, certain way of doing work, everybody in the office together, it was really easy to fall into your pattern and not want to change the way that you're, brainstorming, the way that you're creating your content, the way that you're managing your teams and saying, hey, here's how, everything's moving forward. It was easier just to firefight in a way. Because you had everybody at your fingertips at all times and okay, we need to go on this and it's important right now because we forgot about it. Whereas I think when we started to go remote and people weren't physically there, we needed to be much more buttoned up in making sure people knew what the time requirements were, who was going to be doing what, when they were going to be able to see a draft of something, what the expectations were for that original kind of cut, so that everybody was able to continue to move things forward. And it wouldn't matter so much about just grabbing everybody in a room and doing a war room sort of situation. It was a bit more fluid. And I think it's improved the process. I think it's also improved the quality of the work to be able to instill that level of just overall project management that is important and it's easy to forget.
I loved it. I wish you could have seen me when you said we had to go back to basics. I went, yes. Because this is what you cannot make this transition without having conversations that you should have had ages ago, without revisiting ways of working and without just getting caught in, oh, this is how I'm doing it. Oh, I'll change this now and I carry on. And yes, like you said, firefighting, because like you said, because you have everyone around you, but that is so much more difficult to do when you're not. So really interesting to just, go back to basics. What are we here for? What do we need to be doing?
Yeah, and it shouldn't be surprising, but it did, catch me off guard. I'm like, oh no, we have to think this part through. We should have been doing this, to your point.
And also because we start to get, I find that, what was it? The other day I made a comment about I think I'd run a hybrid event and I put that in some community. And the first thing someone asked me, what tech did you use? Wow, that's the first thing on someone's mind is the technology. But actually, no, we need to reconnect with who we are as people and who we are as a team and as an organization and professionals, and then start to bring the technology, which is an enabler, really.
Absolutely. The tech is supposed to be there to support you, not the other way around.
So before we go into the tech, because I'd be interested to hear just how the technology did help you.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that that surprised you or didn't surprise you as you transitioned?
It probably was, going back to that point about visibility, just the dichotomy that we were facing of helping people see you as being there when you're not physically there. And I think, in some instances, it was interesting to see who really needed that in-person touch in order to kind of keep you in mind, and who was able to adapt some of these like video calls and just make sure that they're raising their hand a bit more and showing off their work a bit more. I think I was surprised by who was good at it and who needed something a little bit different. And I sort of had a probably not a very fair assessment of what that was going to look like. And it surprised me that individuals who I thought would be very able to kind of switch over to a new way of doing work were a little bit more stuck in on their own patterns. So I guess it just goes to show that you don't know how people are going to react until you start trying it out, and that you could be surprised along the way.
Wow. Wow, amazing insight. Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. So you were mentioning earlier on that one of the things that helped you to start this work wherever mindset. I think it is a way of working, but it's also a mindset that you started to use Microsoft Teams, which for listeners who are not familiar with it, it's what Microsoft is trying to make your digital workplace. So it encompasses a kind of chat room, which I always encourage to use asynchronously instead of but you can also use synchronously. You can meet inside Microsoft Teams. You can pull up documents. You can have conversations around documents. You can use Planner to plan your tasks and your projects, etc. So at what stage was it introduced, or did you have it already? Actually, I didn't ask you.
No. When we first moved to remote, we didn't have it. We were very reliant on just regular conference calls, not even video calls. We were really reliant on the emails and trackers. We did use Google Docs every once in a while, kind of sporadically. It depended on the account, and used things like Google Sheets in order to have our trackers, so we could do that in real time while we were on calls and things like that. But it wasn't until probably a year in that we actually introduced Microsoft Teams, and I would say it was probably 2 or 3 months after that people started to actually use it in the way that it was meant to be used. I'd say we still don't use the planning function as we might in the future. But from the team chat perspective, that's worked really well. I think it's helped people connect and know what's going on. And just, as you're thinking through, okay, this needs to be done in the next week or so, it's a place to put those sort of thoughts that you might have said when you walked past somebody's desk in the past, and to have it documented, and you can go back to it whenever it makes sense to. So that's been really helpful. And I think for the teams overall, we've mostly used it as a repository for those documents for individual accounts, so that we all know that this is the place that we can go to, much in the way that we used to use a shared a space, like just folders and things on a shared drive. But it's now the main hub for the documents that we're working on, in part because everybody can make their updates in one location. It's a little bit better at version control. But I'd say, this was something that was a huge transition for us. Just moving from, conference calls, not only internally, but then moving to video calls with our clients as well. It's helped us connect in a way that we hadn't really been able to. In our industry and in communications industry, a big part of what we do is making sure that we're available to our clients and that we're working with them side by side, almost as their arms and legs and additional members of their in-house team. And that's really hard to do when you only see them, once a once a year. So having that kind of visual and everyone sitting down and you kind of have the space, you see the person, you feel like you're, especially with me, I'm in my house. You kind of see the things that are around me, you see my bookcase and things like that. And so having that access to your clients and that visual kind of cue helps you build relationships a bit more too, and makes it a little bit easier for you guys to have franker conversations sometimes as well, which has been interesting.
I'm delighted that you brought that up, because that was my question that I didn't send you, but that came up as we were talking earlier. So because I know that some companies actually have been afraid that their clients, that the relationship is going to change if they don't have that office. And maybe more like a couple of years ago than now, that they wouldn't be considered a proper company. But in your case, it sounds like it's actually helped you with those relationships.
Absolutely. And I think, we're in a unique situation where if we do need to meet in person, we still have that home base at the office. So I can either come down for a day or two and do work sessions and have that space still. But knowing that I can just hop on and that they can kind of come into my life and I can go into theirs has been really an interesting transition. It's made it just a deeper type of relationship than I've had with clients in the past.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's great to hear, because that's how you want to work, and it's working for your clients as well. We've got it all. Excellent. Just going back to that Microsoft Teams experience of introducing our stuff, did it bring any problems with it that you hadn't thought of, or what have been the problems? Were there any problems?
Yeah. Well, one of the things was it wasn't the only thing that we were trying out. Okay. So I think for a little while it was confusing for people about where they should be putting things and how much they should be dedicating their time to learning a new tool, because we had 2 or 3 that we were piloting for a bit at the firm. I have to be honest, it wasn't my favorite one.
Yeah.
I think the user experience is still, there are things about it that could still be enhanced. And there was one in particular that I really liked, because it helped pull together not only just the accounts, but specific projects in a way that was a little bit clearer and gave people marching orders, but also made it easier to share documents and come back to when you needed. So I think for me, for instance, it was like, I have to give this beautiful one up.
Oh, tell us, what was it? I'm sure listeners are thinking, tell us what it was.
Oh, it was Hive. I don't know if you've heard it. It really was more of a project management system, but I loved it because it had just a really nice kind of intuitive flow to it. But it also did a great job in giving you reports back on how your teams were doing, where you needed to double down and focus your efforts. If things were late, when they needed to go. These are all things that I know the planner can do, but the use of planner is a little bit uglier.
Yes, it is. They could do something to it for it to look nicer. To say
it was Hive is one of those things that you can, however you work best. They give you basically a template and a way of viewing the data in that sort of manner. So I thought they did a really nice job with that. But yeah, I think the beauty of Microsoft, though, at least, is that everything plugs in if you're a company that's already using Windows, if you're using Excel, and it's just plug and play, a little bit easier. I think for a big mental shift that needs to happen with going remote, with, introducing new tools and things like that, you want to keep it as comfortable in a way as possible, and then eventually add on and make things a little bit better. But like we had talked about before, going back to basics, even project management skills that people have, you can't just jump to a tool like Hive where it's assumed that you already have that ingrained. So I think that was part of the beauty of going to Teams first anyway, is that it doesn't require everyone to be at that same level of capability. You can still use it independent of how far along you are on your journey of getting back to those basics sometimes.
Yeah, good reflection. So now that so now so you are, if I understood correctly, you're one of 5 employees not based in the office, or not using the office as one of their locations.
No, not based in the office. So we have one individual in Pebble Beach, another one in LA, one person who moved to North Carolina with his family, still the partner in Philadelphia, and then myself up in Maine.
Because I was thinking also that you're not remote employees because everyone is remote from someone else. So everyone is remote, which is
That's
of course
true.
what some people have been saying forever, but it's just taken me a while to catch up on that. So yeah, so from now I'll be talking about non-office based, although as you say, the flexibility of using or not that office has to remain for the people whose base is the office or who live closer to the office.
Exactly.
Because that's another thing is if it's okay for you to be remote if you live very far away. However, if you live around the corner, what are you doing being remote?
That's a good point. I wonder if we're going to move towards that. I mean, we do use freelancers, and sometimes there are our folks who are just down the road who are doing some design or something for us. So maybe that is a pattern or something that's going to be expanded in the path in the future.
Yeah, and there was some research done by the Institute of Leadership and Management a few years ago now on this and more about the mindset that we have no problem having a remote colleague, so someone we are away from who is at the other side of the world. But if we think of someone who's only just a few cities away who could actually take a train to come and meet us, then it becomes a problem. So I think there's still a lot of mindset shifting that we need to go and maybe this will never change. I don't know. I don't know how we're ingrained or how we're wired. So it's very interesting.
It will be interesting to watch, won't it?
Yes, from an anthropological point of view, it's fantastic. Right, Jackie, anything else you want to say before I ask you to give us your contact details? Well, your social media contact details.
No, I think it all comes down to when you're figuring out how to go remote, it really does, like we talked about, go back to the basics. Like you have to really think through what are the key things about what we do that is going to work or not work when people start to work from different locations, and who and when can we go remote, and how does that look? Do we have the resources? Do we have the tools in place to make it possible? Where are we going to need to do some experimentation?
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you very much. And lots of our listeners are on LinkedIn and Twitter. So can you give us your handles there?
It's the same on both. So I am Jackie Walpole, JACQUI, and then Walpole is WALPOLE.
Good. And the company that you've been transitioning and have arrived at a work wherever mindset and way of working is Peppercom, isn't it?
It's Peppercom, yes.
Great name. I love it. Good. Well, thank you very much, Jackie.
Thank you so much for having me, Pilar. It's been a pleasure.
So I'm delighted to be meeting for the first time Ry Austin, who's the Sales and Marketing Director of Core, and he will tell us a little bit about what that means and what Core does. But welcome, Ry.
Welcome. Thanks for your time.
So just for listeners, what does Core do?
Core is a technology company. We take what Microsoft brings to market and we wrap that in a way that our customers can use it to work more effectively. We're referred to in many respects as a Microsoft service partner. But for us, it's really about connecting what Microsoft take to market, making it work for our customers.
And talking to your colleague, Louise, she was saying that one of the things you do, of course, is you go into organizations who want to, well, I will ask you more about this, but who want to adopt Microsoft products or actually technology to help them collaborate online more efficiently. And of course, what you do goes beyond just saying, oh, this is what they've got. Do you look at their culture? What do you look at in an organization when you first start working with them?
Initially, obviously, it's important to understand where they are at that point in time. So they're coming to us because there's a challenge of some sort they want to overcome. So we start with looking at what they've got, but more importantly, what they're trying to achieve, because we see a lot of people that are trying to deploy technology for the sake of deploying technology. So we start with actually how do they want to work, how do they engage their customers, how are they spread across the map in terms of locations, what information do they need to share, in what format do they share it. So we look at what they're trying to achieve and then work backwards from there.
Because it's quite a holistic approach, isn't it? Because this is not just about here's a piece of technology and here's how to use it. You're really looking at, like you mentioned, the customers, how they interact with that, the aims of the organization. It's a very holistic approach. Do you work with different people in the organization or do you mainly work with IT?
Generally, IT are involved, although we tend to advise that we've got other stakeholders that join the conversation that can represent the whole business. So we prefer to have department heads or spokespeople from certainly internal communications, from HR, ideally the management team to kind of bring in what they want from the top. So we get that feedback directly from them. So we look to get representation from the entire organization, but hopefully a few key stakeholders that can speak on behalf of their departments, because IT, we're always there to really make sure it's being done the right way for them. And we're using the right technology that works in their ideal values. But yeah, it's important for us to, again, link back to what they're trying to achieve, which sometimes IT can't always do for us.
And do you find, this is just something that came to mind, do you find that different people in the organization have different ideas of why they want to bring in technology? Or have you picked up any of that? Or actually, have people already had that conversation before?
We get a lot of conversations about when a customer wants to deploy a certain bit of technology. And then sometimes when you kind of dive through to kind of, that's great, because actually it's good for us because that's what we do, is deploying technology, but that's the means to an end. We always try and work out what is the reason for that. So sometimes we've had someone come to us saying we want to deploy this piece of technology. We dive into the reasons behind why that is. And sometimes they need changes. So yeah, sometimes there isn't always the right driver behind rolling out a bit of technology. But so yeah, when you involve IT, they may even need to roll out a bit of technology because that's what they want to go and do. Some of the business say, well, actually, that's not what we need. So you sometimes do get a difference, but normally if you root back to what's this thing need to do in the end, you normally get to the right answer.
And what concerns do people have? I was going to say what organizations, but it's people. What concerns do they have about implementing? Sometimes I imagine they are new tools, but sometimes maybe they haven't had so much technology involved in their communication. So what are their concerns?
There's quite a few, and the concerns are well founded because IT projects have got reputations for not always going smoothly, but the bigger ones that we come across are more cultural and really planning an organization for change. Because if we look at what's happened in the last few years with the cloud and now remote working, even more topical now than ever, if that was just technology that was just rolled out without much thought, it can create a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos, really. So we focus a lot around education, planning for change, make sure that the end users are aware of why we're doing something. They're ready for that change ahead of it being done. So the technology doesn't just land on a desk. It's something they're ready for. They know why we're doing it, what it means to them. And we've thought through that change process. So the concerns that we come across the most that have the most challenges, not normally technology based. Those ones can be solved pretty quickly. But if users are confused, don't get why they should change where they're working, don't get how these new tools work, and they're pushed out without consideration, that's the stuff that, rightly so, people are fearful of. And we spend a lot of time trying to make sure we address those parts first.
And I suppose from your side, this requires, I imagine, a lot of empathy. This is your world, these constant transformations and change. How do you stand in their shoes every time you have a new customer? I mean, this is quite a personal question, but any thoughts on that?
We spend a bit of time looking at, that's where it's important to engage the management team, really, because we look at what someone's trying to achieve for their organization. And that normally comes to the management team, to their goals, whether it be growth or whether it be profitability or whether it be improving frontline services or all the above. There's a driver they have for their organization. As a management team in core, I can relate to those, the thought process there. And then we look at where technology is either holding that back or driving it forwards. So I tend to start there as to try and understand what for them success looks like for the organization and where technology fits into that. And then by routing to that and working backwards, it's quite easy to understand how it can actually impact not just the end users, but also the organization, the customers that use their services. The picture comes into play much easier that way than just being a technology conversation. So I tend to try and start there where we can. Sometimes for more tactical projects, that's not always possible. But generally speaking, if we can't understand how technology would change the organization or improve the growth or whatever their main drivers are, it becomes just a technology conversation. And sometimes the advice we can give is they're limited, just because we don't always know what they're trying to achieve with it.
Moving a little bit more then into the detail and in particular to Office 365, when you start to have that conversation, okay, this is the right choice for them and this is what they're going to start looking at. Office 365 has so much stuff in it. So how do you help them choose? And this is where you're going to have to be patient with myself. I know it's also with some of the listeners who we don't really understand all the stuff that goes behind the scene, this big platform. But how do you help them to choose what to activate, how to activate, what kind of permissions to enable? Where do you start with that?
I was actually having a conversation just this morning about this very topic. So the first thing that we come across with Office 365 is that it's packaged very smartly, and it's packaged in a way that makes good sense in terms of value for money. But sometimes there's stuff in the package that someone doesn't understand or doesn't need, but it's in there anyway. So the first thing we're trying to do is actually what package is right for a customer, because sometimes they've got a package that's maybe too big for them, or there's things they won't use straight away. And the benefit of the way that the cloud licensing works is that you can buy as you use. So there's no point in buying more software than you can use right now, because it just be wasted. So we'd start with what's the right package for our customers, and then kind of that would start the conversation off. But generally, there's so much stuff in there, as you say. Education is the place we'd normally start, which is let's look through again. Once I've kind of covered off what that company is trying to achieve, and we'd look at, okay, let's inform you about what this Microsoft 365 thing is all about, how it will work, go through some examples of how it would actually work inside their organization. So they're actually informed of what's in the box generally, and then go through each of the different products that we feel would have a fit for them based on what we now know about what they're trying to achieve, give them a demo of those products, talk through some examples that work in practice and maybe a use case as to how it would work for them, take a few scenarios about what they do in practice and show them that kind of stuff happening, so they can kind of see the art of the possible, if you will, about what this tooling could do inside their business, but in the context of it working for them rather than just being features and benefits for a product. And then from there, once they're well informed about what those products can do, we can look at what the impact will be of rolling these things out, what's involved, and we can plan what can be quite a long transformation journey. That's doing it properly. It's that they're doing it with their eyes wide open, know what those tools can do for them. They're not turning on features that they're not aware of, and they put in place good governance. So with all these tools, you could leave it open and switch loads of these things on, which again, to your earlier question, we'd advise against that. We look for a controlled rollout where everyone's ready for that change and these tools get deployed in a controlled manner with the right change control, with the right training in place. Everyone's ready for that before it goes live. And governance is another key part of that. Is that we see a lot of what we refer to as sprawl if tools like Microsoft Teams were deployed without governance. What we can say, though, is that no governance plan is one size fits all. So there'd be a discussion around collaboration, how people work, cultures, and we'd help them understand the right governance package for them to make sure the Teams has the creativity and freedom that they want, but is properly controlled. So it's a big answer that could go into more detail, but we start with education and what those tools can do. We make sure that we align that to things like customers want to achieve, because without that, you can roll out lots of technology for the wrong reasons without governance and create a bit of a mess if you're not careful.
And something I've realized is that every organization, of course, is using stuff differently. There's different, even just within the Teams, Microsoft Teams, even just there, how there's lots of different things that you can do. Like some teams will be able, some individuals will be able to add channels. In other organizations, they can't. Some people can't have private channels. So it's very interesting. And I wanted to ask, what are some of the reasons that either clients have shared or that you have felt are there, some of the reasons that the tools are being restricted in their use, or sometimes maybe it's just like you say, maybe it's more of a phased approach. But why do organizations, for example, remove some of the ability to really customize the tools by a team, for example?
Well, I think Teams has arrived quite quickly on the scene. Some organizations, it's been almost a pilot that's gone into production just through nature of being there. And governance is now something they're going back to because there's hundreds of channels or hundreds of sites, and no one knows who owns them. No one knows what they're there for. No one knows kind of what data might need to be looked after inside those sites. People have seen that without the right control and governance in place, it's very hard to manage. in fact, almost impossible to manage. So some people have gone the complete opposite way of saying that have, let's say, a single person that would drive site creation and very clear governance around conventions and naming and how these things can be created. Again, it's a balancing act of creativity and control and what's right for a given customer. But we have seen quite a few where teams has been deployed before people fully thought through what it means in their organization. And there's lots of stuff that's been deployed without the correct form of governance. And that's something they're quite fearful of. So they then remove controls to mean it goes through IT or goes through certain checkpoints before these things get created. One of the common reasons we're seeing these controls taken away is because they've either had it in their business without that control and seen the mess that it can bring, or they've heard about it from one of their colleagues that's worked somewhere else and seen what can happen if those controls aren't there. So they tend to lock things down and then open the gates in a controlled manner. But again, it's different for each organization. Some people love that creativity and love that freedom and love that the collaboration can be as unstructured as anyone wants it to be. It's just not right for every organization that way.
I imagine if it's a free-for-all at the beginning, when it's a large organization and you're working with one team and it's used in one way, and then you work in another team and it's being completely used in a different way. Also, as someone in an organization, it can be quite an interesting experience. And then a little bit more topical. Just we're recording, I don't know what day it is. It's the 30th of March, 2020 today. And what I'm seeing is that, of course, now when you mentioned that Teams is being taken up really quickly, but now even more quickly. Firstly, a lot of the time I'm seeing as a meeting platform. I don't think a lot of people who are making this fast transition to a remote team because of the COVID-19 situation, they're adopting it really quickly and just using it as a meeting platform without understanding that there's all these other features behind it. And it must be really crazy because what you're saying, you really need such a thought through approach. Have you come in touch with any of the organizations that are doing this quite quickly or not yet?
Yeah, I mean, we keep a close eye on the usage of Teams, and we've seen a pretty large spike in the last 2 or 3 weeks, as you can imagine, given the climate right now. We're in end of March. So yeah, it is being adopted much, much heavier and very, very quickly. So reasons for that, I mean, there are things like just instant messaging, a telephony aspect, so PC to PC calling. So it is being switched on and rolled out very, very quickly. And like you mentioned earlier, they do tend to lock down though some of the kind of the creativity because it has been deployed in a less than ideal manner. I spoke earlier about kind of ideally have a strategy, you'd have a change control program, you prepare the field for change, you then roll it out correctly and it goes through smoothly. Unfortunately, right now, there is a need to do things in a more tactical fashion. So definitely it is being rolled out to be an IM platform, to be a meeting workspace, to share documents, to instant message. It is being used for those reasons in a very, very tactical way. And because you can control it and you can lock it down, you can do that. It just means that you're not deploying it to the wild without governance, just deploying it very quickly in a controlled manner, which if you need to get a rapid result, it does do that for you, which is a nice choice to have. Because I think about how the situation would have been if it happened 5-6 years ago. It could have been a much different picture than it is today.
Oh, definitely. That is that is so true. There's no way that we could have kept on working, and so many people could have stayed connected with each other in all sorts of ways, like 5 or 6 years ago. You're right. So then going more to, because you're also now. I can't remember if you usually work in an office, right? I can't remember what Louise said, but you're definitely now working with your remote team. How are you doing, and what's the change been for you?
That's a good question. It's an interesting one because it happens so fast. So we're lucky in a sense that because we lead with a cloud first, work anywhere, connect data with the right people, anytime, any place. That's the kind of thing that we live and breathe anyway. So we're quite lucky that that's how we do things. But even with that, I am still office-based normally. So normally I commute the tube to London, sit in the office and have a team. I sit in the centre of the team deliberately so I can hear what's going on. People swivel their chair and ask questions. And that, even though we've got the technology, there's still a lot of that connecting to other people, which we did in the office. So yeah, this has happened real quick. So it definitely has been a change. So there's one-to-one meetings that we normally have, which we're now doing virtually. And I've got to be very conscious of the fact that the kitchen-based conversations and overhearing stuff that I'd normally have from being sat in the centre of the team, that's now gone away. There is no just catching up on things through overhearing conversations. It's now got to be, we'll have a team-based conversation on Teams, and that's the only information medium that I have unless I get an email or otherwise. So I'm definitely have to be more conscious about catch-ups with team members, just making sure they're okay, because equally if someone's upset in the office, you'd normally kind of see that they're not quite themselves. Again, in a remote world, you don't have that benefit of seeing kind of how they may be feeling. So you're kind of doing the more regular catch-ups on how the team are feeling, just checking they're adapting well. Some people actually embracing the idea of working from home and getting more stuff done and less travel. Others are really, really social and are struggling more with the kind of the isolation that this brings. So much more one-to-one catch-ups, and just relying upon the processes that we have. We use CRM as a means of maintaining our sales cycles. We have all the tooling to better share information smoothly. It's just that now it's the only method that we have. So we're lucky that it is working. We're lucky that we're doing it already. It's just the last 20% that was being done in the office as hearsay and conversations in person. That's that last piece is now being switched to online. So my IM chat window is now going crazy because everyone's just chatting unstructured like we'd be in the office, but through IM, which is great because you can kind of stay connected in that way. But even for us, that we were already a remote working cloud first organization, there's still an extra piece being completely remote working. So I can imagine it as a much bigger journey for other customers that have been mainly office based and not fully ready for the cloud. The tooling isn't there for them. I imagine that's a huge jump for them.
And you make a really important point, because one thing I found is like 5 years ago, there was a huge difference in how people communicated between people who were co-located in the office and then remote. And then with the introduction of something like Teams and Slack, a lot of people have adopted those even when they are in the office. So now the difference is even more subtle now, but there is that difference. And sometimes just because we are already using some of those tools, so like you say, even if you're a cloud-based organization, it is still different. It still needs some adapting, and it's interesting to pinpoint exactly what it is that has changed as you have done.
Even though we're ready for it, it's still a bit strange. But we have,
yes.
but we hire across the UK. So we've got parts of our senior team that are based all over the UK. So there are certain team members that were already working primarily remotely, but we're trying to have that day a week to kind of get that person-to-person contact there. So even that last piece has now gone for us. But like I say, we were largely a mobile-first workforce anyway, so the jump wasn't quite as big for us.
Excellent. Well, Rai, all I can say is if anyone is listening and could do with your help at the moment, because this is something that we can do at Virtual Not Distant. We can add to the culture piece, but we really can't come in and do the tech bit. And to have someone who fully understands the whole journey and the difficulties of people adopting this, it would be great for our listeners to get in touch with you. So, what are the best ways, or which is the one way of getting in touch with you?
I said the website, so www.core.co.uk with the best place, because in there we've got lots of white papers. The way we approach things is all up there. So in terms of some content they can get their hands on, get up to speed with, understand how we approach things, that would be the great place to start. From there, if they like what they hear, we're also doing quite a lot of educational work around webinars and seminars. So in terms of, again, showing how we can do things, that's also there on the website. So it's the best place to start. And if that all looks good, have a conversation and see how we can help you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, especially in these moments where it still feels a bit frantic. So much appreciated.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rai, and thanks, Jackie, earlier too. Listeners, I wanted to come back and pick up on two things. First, the point about when introducing collaboration tools in a company. I mean, Rai was talking about a wider set of tech, but we're concerned mainly about collaboration tools here. And he said that it's a balancing act between creativity and control. And I have been into organizations and talked about recommendations around making teamwork visible, open conversations. And then I've been faced with comments like, well, I thought I had a space which was private to my team. And then I realized that everyone else on the company could see it. So, what did that do to our psychological safety? Or, well, we can't open new channels ourselves. We can't have a private space. So at an organizational level, I think that sometimes within the guidelines and the technical stuff of the training, how we use the tool and all the technical aspects of it, this other stuff is forgotten, is how do we use this best for psychological safety? Or even, can these tools provide us with that? Because sometimes they can't and we need to use them in a different way. So at an organizational level, I think it's important to remind that people need to understand what kind of spaces they're working in and also why they're being set up like that. I always have very strong reactions to anything that looks like it's dampening transparency and self-organization, but many times there are very good reasons for it, as we've heard. So especially as these tools become so popular, like when people move jobs to a different company, they might be making all sorts of assumptions about how something works, not even at just how we use it day to day, but the infrastructure and what it's allowing us to do. Even things like, who is this visible to? So that's one thing, that if we're restricting how the tools are used, let's remember they were designed to make work visible. So anything that restricts them needs to have a good reason behind that. Also, if we're working as managers within an organization, there might still be some flexibility around how we use the tools in the team. So it's worth looking at that with team members and agreeing and seeing, is this working for us? And if not, is there anything that we can change without, that we can actually change? Or can we change how we use them? Can we change our behaviors around them? What can we do so they suit us? So if you want to hear more around all of this, some of the issues, things to look around, I recommend that you listen to, I've got a few episodes actually, a bonus episode from the 7th of June 2019 with Justin Morris. Since then, I've been putting numbers in the bonuses so that they last longer. Then episode 199 on digital transformation with Ewan Semple, and 191 with Matt Ballantyne, which is actually about improving collaboration in organizations, and it's quite detailed. And there's a cheat sheet that we've linked to on the show notes there, so really worth looking at. The other thing, listeners, I wanted to pick up on from Rai's conversation, he was mentioning about missing those spontaneous interactions in the workplace. And regular listeners will be familiar with the concept of planned spontaneity, which is part of visible teamwork. And this is the concept that says, well, in the online space, you need to deliberately make space for spontaneous interaction. Pretty much like in the co-located space, actually, because we know that offices are now being designed in ways that allow people to bump into each other. So it's just that this way it's more visible. And while that is being done by architects, this might need to be designed at the team level. So if this is something that you're concerned about, then guess what? We have an episode for you, 211. The second half of that episode is Maya and myself talking about planned spontaneity. And the other thing to look out for when you're transitioning to remote with a bit of time in a more deliberate and planned manner is that you don't move all your online communication to real-time communication. You've probably seen this, and maybe you've experienced this now with a sudden move from home, is that how do we communicate online? We have meetings or real-time chat. And so this means that we're in danger of transferring everything that we didn't like as much from the office. In the online space, it's going to amplify. So I think that's plan those times when you're all happy to be interrupted. Communicate them in some way or just have a schedule for them. And then block times when, unless it's necessary to talk to each other, you can all enjoy quality focus time on your own. I think this is something that we can start looking at when we start to either ease the lockdown or when time has passed a bit and we're still not wanting to be connected to everyone all the time, because this is something I've seen. But to be honest, this can happen in any kind of transition. If we're not used to asynchronous communication, if we're not used to talking about the rules of communication in our team, this can happen. So we don't want to transfer the worst things about the office space, which is constant interruptions and noise, onto the online space, but it will happen. So agree on how to use things like Slack or Microsoft Teams, which they are there as real-time chat, but they work beautifully asynchronously. You don't all have to be answering every message, but have a discussion, very brief one, about this. Because remember then, one of the wonderful things about working away from each other is that you can work away from each other. You can spend focused time on doing the work that is also part of collaboration, but doesn't require constant input from each other. So anyway, if you need any help with that, that's what we do at Virtual Not Distant. We will help you design those communication agreements and processes. We might not be able to answer every question about the tech you have. That's not our expertise. People like Raya are there for that. But it will help you see what you need, what kind of things you need. And it might be that you don't need a tech. Maybe you need a phone call. I don't know. But it will help you design ways of working that suit your team and work. And it's really important to remember there's not one way of doing this, as you have heard from our guests, and context is very important. So if you're experiencing remote work for the first time during the pandemic, then remember that the context, which suddenly shifts, no option of where to work from, lots of other stuff going on in the home and the global crisis, that's all part of the context at the moment in April 2020. That context will have influenced how you've decided to work, consciously or subconsciously, and how well it's working for you. When the context changes, make sure that you change how you're working. And if you need any help, then here we are, both with our services, but also with loads of podcast episodes that we'll continue releasing, our collection of blog posts in the book Thinking Remote, the book Online Meetings That Matter, which I released this February and I wish I had subtitle, but don't just communicate via your meetings. And finally, well, you can email me, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. And we also have a monthly newsletter with reading and listening recommendations, which you can sign up for that at the website. So a big thank you to you all for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.